People will ask you about your plans, your beliefs, your emotions, pretending it's just conversation. But if you're mentally awake, you already know this. Every answer you give becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. What most people call being open, Machiavelli would call voluntary disarmament. The world doesn't reward transparency, it exploits it. There are 5 things that, once revealed, quietly shift the balance of power against you. You'll notice, every time you reveal them, you feel a little more seen, but a little less respected, a little lighter, but a little weaker. The first thing you should never reveal is your mental distance. When you're awake, you see the illusions people live under, the social hierarchies they chase, the false identities they wear to protect themselves, the noise they mistake for meaning. But if you reveal that you've detached from that illusion, you become the enemy of their comfort. They won't admire your clarity, they'll fear it. Because once they realize you're not hypnotized by the same dream they are, you stop being predictable. They can't manipulate someone who doesn't play the same game. That's why Machiavelli would tell you to act as if you still belong to the illusion. Blend in, smile, pretend you believe what they believe. Your awareness is your weapon, but the moment you show it, you give them time to prepare defenses. Never show that you're seeing through the performance. Let them believe you're still part of the crowd, even when you've already left it mentally. That's how you move through the world untouched. The second thing never to reveal is your inner war. Every mentally awake person fights one. The war between what they know and what they still feel, between old programming and new awareness, between wanting to save people and realizing you can't. This battle makes you powerful, but it also makes you vulnerable, and people can smell unresolved conflict like blood in the water. The moment you talk about your doubts, your insecurities, your confusion, even in honesty, most people won't understand it. They'll categorize it. You're overthinking. You're negative. You've changed. They'll try to bring you back down to the level they're comfortable with. Machiavelli would say, conceal the chaos until it's complete. The alchemist doesn't reveal the formula mid-transformation. You don't expose your inner war while it's still burning. Because while you're fighting your own mind, others are watching, waiting to use your instability as leverage. The calmest face in the room is often the one surviving the greatest internal storm, but only the wise know that. The third thing you must never reveal is your source of power. Every mentally awake person eventually finds one, a principle, a practice, or a truth that anchors them while the rest of the world spins. Maybe it's detachment, maybe it's discipline, maybe it's the refusal to be emotionally blackmailed. But once people learn what stabilizes you, they'll find ways to disrupt it. They'll test it. If your strength is solitude, they'll invade your silence. If it's confidence, they'll question it. If it's moral clarity, they'll tempt you with ambiguity. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. Power is not only about possession, but protection. The strongest fortress is the one no one knows exists. So, guard your rituals, your routines, your sources of strength as sacred. Never explain what gives you peace. Just live it quietly until the results speak for you. There's a reason every powerful person in history had a certain mystery. It wasn't always intentional. Sometimes it was simply intelligence. They knew too much to speak freely. The mentally awake realize that words are currency and the economy of trust is always unstable. Most people spend their thoughts on anyone who will listen. The awake invest theirs only where silence has been earned. And this brings us to the fourth thing, your disillusionment. The day your mind wakes up, you see how everything you were told was inverted. The good are often powerless, the humble are often ignored, the loud are mistaken for confident, and the quiet for weak. This realization burns, but it also liberates. Yet if you share it too early, people will mistake your awakening for bitterness. They'll accuse you of arrogance, of losing faith, of thinking you're better than everyone else. They'll try to reshackle your mind with guilt, so you must let your silence become your rebellion. Machiavelli would say, reveal your conclusions only when you can enforce them. Until then, nod and smile while you rebuild your understanding of the world, because the truth, when spoken without power, becomes noise. And in a world addicted to illusion, noise gets buried quickly. The fifth thing, and perhaps the most dangerous to reveal, is your vision. Once you begin to think beyond what's visible, to plan years ahead, to see outcomes others can't yet imagine, you step into a higher battlefield. Vision is the crown jewel of an awake mind. But if you expose it prematurely, people will either steal it, mock it, or sabotage it. Not because they're evil, because it reminds them of their own smallness. They'll tell you to be realistic, to slow down, to stay safe. But their advice isn't wisdom, it's fear disguised as care. Machiavelli would smile here. He knew that visionaries must often play fools until the moment arrives, because the less others expect from you, the easier it is to move unchallenged. Keep your ambitions sealed in quiet labor. When it manifests, no one will believe it came from you, and that disbelief is the sweetest shield. Most people imagine power as loud, confident, visible. But true power, Machiavellian power, is subtle, invisible, nearly spiritual. It lives in the silence between what you know and what you choose to say. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, you build inner gravity. People can feel it without understanding it. They'll sense something about you, something self-contained, untouchable, and it will either draw them in or terrify them. Both are useful. Being mentally awake is not about exposing truth. It's about embodying it so deeply that you no longer need to. The 5 things you conceal become the armor of your consciousness. They keep your energy undiluted, because the truth is, every revelation costs energy, and every audience demands performance. If you're not careful, you spend your awareness trying to prove it exists. And that's how the awake become exhausted. They mistake expression for connection, confession for depth, openness for intimacy. But Machiavelli would remind you, the one who controls what they reveal controls the game. So, test yourself. Notice when you feel that impulse to explain who you are, why you've changed, what you're building. Notice who you're trying to convince, and ask yourself why. If the answer is validation, stop. Because the mentally awake don't need witnesses, they need results. Every secret you keep sharpens your edge. Every silence makes you unpredictable. And in a world where everyone broadcasts everything, unpredictability is the last form of mystery left. The ones who understand this rule move differently. They watch more than they speak. They know that knowledge shouted loses its power. They've learned that being misunderstood is safer than being fully known. Because when people think they've figured you out, they stop fearing you. When they can't, they start respecting you. The mentally awake don't chase admiration, they cultivate presence. And presence is born from what you withhold. You don't need to hide out of paranoia. You hide out of wisdom. Because you know what most never learn. Once something sacred is spoken, it stops being sacred. Once your strategy is visible, it stops being powerful. So speak less. Reveal less. And when you finally do speak, make every word count like a blade drawn only when necessary. That's how Machiavelli would move in today's world, not as a manipulator of others, but as a master of himself. And in a society addicted to exposure, the one who stays hidden becomes the one everyone sees. There's a strange irony in silence. The moment you begin to practice it, people assume you've become distant, cold, arrogant. But silence is not absence. It's observation. The mentally awake person learns that silence is the purest form of control because it forces everyone else to reveal themselves first. While others rush to fill the air with words, to defend their image, to explain their motives, you stand back and watch. You see their insecurities leak through their speech, their desperation through their tone, their weakness through their need to be understood. And that's when you realize truth doesn't have to shout. It just has to remain unmoved. Machiavelli would tell you, the mind that speaks last wins. Because every conversation is a small negotiation of power. When you stay silent, people project onto you. They build stories, assumptions, interpretations, and while they're busy trying to read you, they expose themselves completely. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their desires, their fears, their hunger for validation. They show you exactly how to control them without you saying a single word. The mentally awake are often accused of being mysterious. But that mystery isn't a strategy, it's a side effect of awareness. You no longer participate in meaningless emotional transactions. You've stopped giving away explanations to people who don't listen, energy to people who don't reciprocate, or plans to people who don't act. That's when others start calling you unpredictable. What they really mean is they can't manipulate you anymore. You've broken the social contract of constant self-disclosure. You've learned that honesty is valuable only when it's earned. Think about it. Every time you share something, you create an expectation. The moment you tell someone what you're working on, they start waiting to see if you'll fail. The moment you explain your boundaries, they start testing them. The moment you reveal what hurts you, they unconsciously or deliberately push on it to see how deep it goes. Most of them don't even mean harm. It's just human nature to test what's visible. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. What's visible can be attacked, what's invisible can't. That's why he valued secrecy more than strength. Because secrets create confusion, and confusion breeds caution. When no one is sure what you're thinking, they're forced to assume the worst, and that assumption alone gives you leverage. But here's where most awake people make their mistake. They think silence means isolation. It doesn't. Silence doesn't mean cutting off the world. It means engaging with it from a position of control. You still connect, but you no longer overshare. You still speak, but only when it serves a purpose. You still listen, but you no longer absorb other people's chaos. You begin to curate what enters your mind like a gatekeeper of your own sanity. Because awareness without boundaries is self-destruction, the more awake you become, the more selective you must be. Every conversation has a cost. Every word shapes perception. Every revelation changes how people treat you. And when you're awake, people will treat your openness as a challenge. They'll want to prove you wrong, humble you, or expose flaws in your insight. That's why Machiavelli's true advice isn't just be cunning, it's be unreadable. The world can't destroy what it can't define. There's also a spiritual layer to this. When you start hiding your awareness, your energy stops leaking. You begin to feel lighter, sharper, calmer, because every time you resist the urge to overshare, you strengthen your internal equilibrium. You stop living reactively, and you start moving intentionally. Silence becomes your fortress, not built of walls, but of presence. People feel it when you walk into a room. You don't need to prove you know something. Your stillness says it for you. This is where the mentally awake separate from the intellectually awake. The intellectually awake love to talk about their discoveries, their philosophies, their realizations. They crave the performance of depth. But the mentally awake understand something deeper, that truth loses its potency when it's constantly broadcast. They don't chase the validation of sounding wise. They chase the discipline of remaining grounded. They don't want to sound awakened. They want to live awakened. And that difference changes everything. Because the moment you start explaining your evolution, you start negotiating it. You start defending it against people who haven't earned the right to question it. And soon, you're back where you started, trying to justify your awareness to those who benefit from your confusion. Machiavelli would call that a tactical error, exposing your advantage before securing your position. Never let others know how deep your awareness runs. Let them underestimate you, dismiss you, mislabel you. Every misjudgment they make becomes an invisible shield. They can't attack what they think is harmless. This is why the mentally awake eventually become selective with company. Not because they're antisocial, but because they've realized most people don't listen to understand. They listen to react. And the more awake you are, the more your truth threatens their comfort. That's why so many awakened people end up walking alone for a while. They don't fit into the echo chambers of surface-level thinking anymore. They no longer find peace in small talk or validation in popularity. They crave depth, not attention, silence, not applause, understanding, not acceptance. But there's a hidden reward in all this. When you master silence, you no longer need to defend your worth. You stop performing for approval. You start moving like someone who already knows their value. That kind of energy bends rooms. People start watching you without realizing why. They start mirroring your tone, adjusting their words, second-guessing their approach. You change the dynamic simply by existing in control of yourself. That's what Machiavelli meant when he spoke of power through presence. It's not loud dominance, it's invisible authority. And maybe the hardest part of this entire awakening is learning to carry knowledge without needing to share it. You'll have insights that burn inside you, truths that could liberate others, patterns that explain the madness of society, and yet you'll have to stay silent, not because you don't care, but because you've seen what happens when you try. People don't want awakening. They want validation. They don't seek truth. They seek comfort. And when your awareness threatens that comfort, they'll call you cynical, negative, or even insane. So, you learn to keep your realizations sacred. You let your transformation speak through your choices, not your explanations. The mentally awake person becomes their own language. Their posture, their decisions, their energy, everything communicates without words. You become proof instead of persuasion. And once you reach that level, you realize how free you've become. You no longer fear misunderstanding because you no longer depend on being understood. You've reclaimed your mental sovereignty. The art of concealment isn't about deception. It's about preservation. It's about understanding that your awareness is not entertainment for others. It's ammunition for your evolution. So you protect it, polish it, and keep it away from those who drain it. Because when you finally understand how rare mental clarity is, you stop wasting it on noise. You guard it like Machiavelli guarded his strategies, with quiet ruthlessness and perfect composure. And the deeper you go, the more you realize. The truly awakened don't need recognition. Their power is felt, not announced. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's precision. Every unspoken word becomes part of their strength. And by the time others notice, it's already too late. Eventually, your silence starts to disturb people. They can't figure out if you're calm or calculating, detached or dangerous. That's exactly where your power begins to grow. Because when people don't know what moves you, they don't know how to move against you. The mentally awake learn this intuitively. Uncertainty in others is the invisible territory of influence. You never need to dominate anyone when they're already uncertain about you. That uncertainty makes them careful, and careful people make predictable mistakes. Machiavelli understood this paradox better than anyone. If you want control, don't demand it. Let others give it to you out of confusion. The more they try to decode you, the deeper they fall into your rhythm. This is the silent game most awake minds play without even realizing it. It's not manipulation, it's equilibrium. You're not trying to deceive others. You're trying to maintain the delicate balance between awareness and exposure. Too much transparency, and you become vulnerable. Too much secrecy, and you become alien. The real mastery lies in speaking just enough truth to appear open, but never enough to be predictable. You'll notice people with no awareness reveal everything about themselves. They'll tell you what they love, what they fear, who they hate, what keeps them up at night, all within the first hour of knowing you. They think this is connection, but it's confession. They're unknowingly handing over the blueprint to their psyche. Machiavelli would call this giving the enemy your map before the war even begins. And yet, the awake don't fall for this performance of honesty. They listen patiently, take mental notes, and reveal almost nothing in return. They understand that trust isn't earned through words, it's tested through consistency. But here's where the mental trap appears. Once you become aware of all this, there's a temptation to start playing chess with everyone around you, to become hyper-calculative, strategic, untouchable. That's when awakening becomes armor instead of wisdom. Because while Machiavelli teaches cunning, he never teaches paranoia. The difference is subtle but vital. A paranoid mind isolates itself and rots in suspicion. A cunning mind stays engaged but never enslaved. You must learn to move between those two states gracefully. The world isn't your enemy, it's your field of study. Every interaction reveals something, not about others, but about yourself. Being mentally awake means you stop reacting emotionally to betrayal, gossip, or misunderstanding. You start seeing them as predictable responses to power. When someone lies to you, you don't flare up. You analyze the motive. When someone tests your patience, you observe their insecurity. When someone betrays you, you note how they justify it to themselves. This is what Machiavelli meant by emotional discipline, the ability to turn pain into information. You stop asking, "Why would they do this to me?" and start asking, "What does this reveal about how people protect themselves?" That question changes everything. And as your awareness deepens, another realization hits you. Most people don't want truth. They want stories that protect their egos. You'll see this in conversations where you speak even a fragment of honesty and the room tightens. Eyes shift, smiles fade, the energy drops. You'll learn that awareness makes people uncomfortable because it disrupts their illusion of control. And when you carry that kind of energy, you'll notice people either gravitate toward you with curiosity or recoil with fear. Both reactions are gifts. The curious reveal potential allies. The fearful reveal where power truly lies. There's an old Machiavellian saying, "He who knows how to appear honest but knows when to stay silent controls both fools and the wise." This doesn't mean faking integrity, it means mastering perception. If people believe you're genuine, they stop guarding themselves around you. If they think you're ordinary, they underestimate you. And in both cases, you win. The trick is to build a reputation for simplicity while harboring a mind of precision. You act easy to read, but remain impossible to predict. That's not deceit, that's survival in a world where transparency is currency and everyone's bankrupting themselves for approval. You'll begin to notice patterns. The loudest people in the room are usually the weakest. The ones obsessed with validation are the easiest to control. The ones who mock your quietness secretly envy it. Because silence exposes them, it highlights their inner noise. They sense your composure as a mirror, reflecting their chaos. That's why they try to provoke you. They want to pull you back into the noise so they don't feel so small standing next to your stillness. But when you refuse to react, when you hold your line with a calm half-smile, you break something inside them. They realize you don't need their validation, and that realization terrifies them. The awake mind doesn't seek to dominate through confrontation. It dominates through contrast. You become the example of what control looks like in a world addicted to reaction. People start adjusting their tone when they talk to you, lowering their voice, watching their words. That's how authority forms, organically, through presence. Machiavelli would say that power earned through fear fades, but power earned through mystery endures. Because mystery cannot be destroyed, it can only be wondered about. And this is where many mentally awake people start to feel isolated, not because they're alone, but because few can meet them where they are. Once your mind reaches a certain level of clarity, conversations feel heavier. You can't unsee the patterns, the manipulation, the games people play unconsciously. It can be exhausting to watch everyone sleepwalk through life while thinking they're awake. But don't mistake solitude for loneliness. It's the silence where your real evolution happens. The less you need to explain, the more you understand. You start replacing explanations with presence, arguments with evidence, reaction with observation. You learn to let your results speak louder than your reasoning. You stop trying to convince anyone because you understand. No one can hear you above the noise of their own illusions. Machiavelli would remind you here, power is not about making others see your truth. It's about shaping the environment until they see it themselves. That's what a truly awake mind does. It doesn't argue. It engineers perception through patience. And soon your restraint becomes your revolution. Every silence becomes a declaration that you refuse to play the shallow games of attention and validation. Every unspoken truth becomes a weapon kept sharp for when it's truly needed. You stop leaking energy into arguments and start channeling it into actions. The less you reveal, the more you achieve. And the more you achieve quietly, the louder your existence becomes. This is the paradox of the mentally awake in a noisy world. The quieter you are, the more people hear you. Because in an age where everyone is performing, authenticity whispers and still commands the entire room. That's the real Machiavellian mastery. Not loud strategy, not visible manipulation, but a kind of invisible elegance. The ability to move through chaos untouched, to hold your mind like a secret weapon, and to let the world wonder how you stay so composed when everyone else is busy breaking. At some point, you'll notice something unsettling. The more awake you become, the more you start to see conversations as calculations. Not because you're cold, but because awareness reveals the mechanics of every interaction. You notice tone shifts, power dynamics, emotional hooks. You start seeing how people talk not to communicate, but to control how they're perceived. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The naive part of you that once believed in open communication begins to die. You realize that most words are not exchanges of truth, they're veils. Machiavelli would say that speech is the easiest way to lose leverage. Because every time you speak, you expose your values, your priorities, and your limits. People will learn what offends you, what excites you, what you defend most passionately, and all of that becomes a roadmap to your mind. The mentally awake learn to speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand the cost of every word. They've learned that true intelligence isn't proven through how much you talk, but through how much you withhold. This doesn't mean being emotionless. It means being intentional. Most people speak to fill silence. The awake speak to direct energy. Every sentence is an investment. It either strengthens your position or weakens it. And when you start treating words as currency, you realize how poor most people really are. They spend endlessly and wonder why no one values what they say. Machiavelli knew this long before social media turned validation into a marketplace. He would remind you that your silence is more valuable than their noise, because silence cannot be misquoted, twisted, or used against you. You'll also learn that being mentally awake means being comfortable with being misunderstood. The more you guard your mind, the more people will project theirs onto you. They'll call you arrogant for not sharing, distant for not explaining, cold for not reacting. But what they're really saying is, I can't read you, and that makes me uncomfortable. Their frustration is your proof of control. They want access to your mental space, and your refusal creates resistance. That resistance builds magnetism, because the harder it is to know you, the more people try. That curiosity becomes your shield. But there's an even deeper layer to this. Once you master silence and selective speech, you begin to realize the most dangerous revelations aren't the ones about others. They're the ones about yourself. The 5 things Machiavelli would warn you never to reveal: your detachment, your inner war, your source of strength, your disillusionment, and your vision all orbit one central idea: protection of identity. Because once people understand your identity, they can manipulate your sense of self. If they know what you value, they can bribe you. If they know what you fear, they can control you. If they know what you dream about, they can distract you. That's why Machiavelli's wisdom still stands centuries later. Protect the architecture of your mind. Let people see the facade, never the blueprint. You can be kind, approachable, even open, but never transparent. Transparency is a myth sold to the naive. It's presented as honesty, but in reality, it's surrender. Because when you reveal everything, you remove every layer of defense. There's a difference between truth and exposure. The awake understand that truth is internal clarity, while exposure is external vulnerability. You can live truthfully while still being unreadable. As your awareness matures, you'll start to crave a different kind of communication, the kind that doesn't rely on explanation. You begin to value gestures over speeches, silence over debates, precision over performance. You realize that most arguments are traps, designed not to find truth, but to drain your energy. When you refuse to argue, people will call you evasive. But what you're actually doing is refusing to invest in a losing game. You understand that emotional reaction is the quickest path to losing psychological ground. And Machiavelli would smile at that, because nothing terrifies manipulators more than a calm opponent. They expect you to defend yourself, to justify, to clarify, to seek their understanding. But when you simply nod or smile faintly and walk away, it disarms them completely. You've denied them access to your emotional state, and that's where their power used to live. The mentally awake don't win by fighting harder. They win by refusing to fight where it's meaningless. They reserve their energy for battles that shape destiny, not ego, and that's what begins to set you apart. You're no longer competing for recognition. You're calculating for legacy. You think in years while others think in hours. And that's the final layer of Machiavellian silence: patience. You start to understand that revealing your path too soon ruins it. Premature exposure is the death of transformation. When you tell everyone what you're becoming, you tie your evolution to their reactions. You give them permission to interfere, to doubt, to discourage. And worse, you give your subconscious a false sense of completion, as if speaking your plan is the same as achieving it. So you stop announcing. You just start building. Quietly, consistently, invisibly. You let curiosity become your marketing and mystery become your momentum. You stop explaining why you disappeared, why you changed, why you seem different. Because the ones meant to understand will notice through your results, and the rest don't matter. That's what makes the mentally awake dangerous in silence. They stop leaking energy through validation. They stop justifying their evolution. They stop reacting to manipulation. Their calmness becomes unnerving, their detachment intimidating, their precision almost inhuman. They've become what Machiavelli always envisioned: a person who controls perception instead of being controlled by it. And as this silence grows stronger, so does your independence. You realize you no longer owe anyone your reasoning. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer feel the compulsion to set the record straight. Because truth doesn't need witnesses, it needs consistency. You start understanding that the best revenge for misunderstanding is longevity, to outlast, to evolve past the need to be seen. This is the essence of Machiavellian awareness. Not manipulation of others, but mastery of self. To see through illusions without becoming bitter, to play among the blind without losing sight, to move through noise without needing to shout, and to hold your truth quietly like a blade hidden under silk, beautiful but deadly when necessary. When you finally reach that level, you stop asking, "Who understands me?" and start asking, who deserves to? Because the awake don't crave followers, they attract observers. And the observers who stay long enough eventually realize that silence isn't emptiness. It's command. It's the sound of someone who knows exactly where they're going and doesn't need the world's permission to get there. Eventually, your quietness stops being a strategy and starts becoming your nature. You no longer calculate when to speak or what to reveal. You simply don't feel the need to. You've realized that most of what you once shared wasn't for connection, but for reassurance. You used to explain yourself so people wouldn't misunderstand you. Now you understand that being misunderstood is the tax you pay for living with depth. You stop paying attention to the noise of interpretation. You stop trying to control perception. You simply exist as you are, and that's what makes you powerful. The mentally awake reach this stage like climbers reaching a mountain peak, breathless, alone but free. You look down and see all the old versions of yourself that needed to be seen, to be accepted, to be believed. You smile, not with arrogance, but with peace. Because now you finally understand what Machiavelli meant when he said that appearances rule the world, but reality rules appearances. The people you once tried to convince are still trapped in performance. They spend their lives proving, defending, arguing, but none of it ever builds strength. Because power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being stable when unseen. The world tries to convince you that transparency equals trust, that openness equals connection, that sharing equals authenticity. But if you observe long enough, you'll notice the opposite is true. The people who share everything are the least at peace. They exhaust themselves maintaining the image of honesty. They bleed out emotionally until there's nothing sacred left. The truly awake build in silence, heal in silence, and evolve in silence, because they've learned the oldest Machiavellian law of all. Power is never in what you show, it's in what you hide well. You can see this in nature. The ocean hides its depth, the forest conceals its roots, the sky reveals only the light, not the infinite dark behind it. What's unseen sustains what's seen. You too must live that way. You don't need to prove how deep you are, just stay deep. You don't need to explain your transformation, just become it so completely that your silence speaks louder than any declaration ever could. And slowly, the way people treat you begins to shift. Some grow uneasy because your energy no longer bends to their expectations. They can't guilt you, they can't provoke you, they can't pull reactions out of you anymore. Others start respecting you differently, not because you demand it, but because they can sense you're not playing the same game. Your boundaries are invisible, but undeniable. You no longer ask for peace. You are peace, and that presence disciplines chaos. That's what Machiavelli meant by silent rule, influence without assertion. The more awake you become, the more you realize how rarely others listen, not out of malice, but out of noise. They're not hearing you, they're hearing their own fears echo through your words. That's why the mentally awake don't waste truth on deaf ears. You can't wake those who want to keep dreaming. You simply move differently, gracefully, deliberately, untouchably, and that quiet movement becomes your message. You'll start noticing that your silence begins to protect you in ways words never could. It shields your vision while it's still fragile. It guards your healing while it's still raw. It hides your strategy while it's still forming. You no longer crave recognition at every step. You crave results that make recognition unavoidable. You stop showing progress and start becoming progress. Every step forward becomes invisible until it's irreversible. But this kind of strength comes with a cost: isolation. There will be days you'll feel detached from everyone, like you're existing on a different wavelength. The mentally asleep will call you emotionless. The half-awake will call you distant. But solitude is the price of inner order. Machiavelli would remind you that a prince who listens too much to the crowd loses control of his castle. The same is true for the mind. If you let too many voices in, you lose the command of your own. And that's why the awake guard their solitude like kings guard their throne. Not because they hate company, but because they value clarity more. They know that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. It's where the real decisions happen, the ones that shape your fate quietly while the world is still asleep. The world rewards visibility. Power rewards invisibility. Visibility feeds the ego. Invisibility feeds the soul. You begin to realize that even when you speak now, your words land differently. They carry weight. They pierce through noise because they're no longer born from impulse, but from stillness. People lean in. They remember what you say because you don't say much. You've become the kind of person whose approval matters, not because you give it freely, but because you give it rarely. That's real power, selective energy, deliberate words, and unexplainable calm. And that's what makes the mentally awake so disorienting to others. You're not playing by the social rules anymore. You don't react the way they expect. You don't explain the way they demand. You've mastered the art of invisible control. People mistake your composure for mystery, your mystery for danger, and your danger for authority. They can't tell if you're withholding or just unbothered. Either way, it keeps them cautious, and caution is the shadow of respect. When you reach this level, you stop needing Machiavelli's lessons as tactics. They simply become your nature. You don't apply strategy, you embody it. Your detachment protects you, your silence guides you, your vision moves you, your restraint defines you. You're no longer fighting the world, you're navigating it with elegance. The chaos around you doesn't shake you because you've learned the ultimate truth. Nothing external can disrupt an internal order that refuses to explain itself. So, keep your awareness quiet. Let your depth stay unseen. Let your growth happen in shadows, and your strength reveal itself only through consequence. Because the world doesn't need your explanations, it needs your example. The mentally awake don't teach through speeches. They teach through transformation. They become proof that silence, when mastered, is not emptiness, it's evolution happening at a frequency most can't hear. And one day someone will ask how you did it, how you stayed calm when everything tried to pull you apart, how you built so much without noise, how you never lost your composure while everyone else was fighting for attention. You'll smile, not out of pride, but because you'll finally understand. They're asking for something that can't be told. It can only be lived. And that's the last thing the mentally awake never reveal, how they became who they are. Because once you give that away, you give away the only mystery that keeps the world guessing, the one that keeps your power alive.